We'll try to see what's going on in her. It's a 20-minute drive. Community for having stuff down here though, so. I must love to tell people it took me last time to hear a song.
All right, you're good to go.
Thanks, Glenn. So, hello, it is February 24th, 2025. I'm going to call the regular planning commission meeting to order for Grant County Planning Commission. Believe we have full attendance today. All 7 planning commissioners are here. Mikhail, the planning administrative support assistant, is out sick today. So we have Dan Stenta staffing for us. He is the current land use administrator. And so just if you haven't met Dan in person, hi Dan. Gonna just jump right into it. This is a real short agenda because we haven't had staff and there's been some sickness and a whole bunch of other stuff. I'm gonna take a minute to explain in general business a couple of things that I'm actively working on. But first and foremost, get into the 4:30 citizens to be heard. I don't see any participants online. I see no civilian citizens in the room. So I'm going to assume we'll revisit this at 6 if we make it that far. Cool. Ex parte communications and disclosures. We can go counterclockwise from me. I have none. None. Very good. Next would be the approval of the meeting minutes from January 27th, 2025. I did not see those meeting minutes in the online portal, so I'm going to recommend that we table the approval of those minutes until they're uploaded onto the public website. Do I have a motion?
Actually, I have a comment on that. That
Yeah.
would be correct before we do that.
Sure.
That is there was one missing, Megan Schaefer. Where we don't have her either in attendance or absent.
Okay.
I don't remember if Megan was here.
I was.
I'm very sure I saw it.
In a later, they aren't paid, yeah, maybe not be on the website. We did get minutes to look at that.
Yeah, we were taking up by.
Okay. Well, in that case, if we have seen the minutes from January 27th, I'd entertain a motion to approve with the correction that Megan Schaefer was present at the 27th meeting.
I had nothing else. I noticed nothing else.
So is that your movie to approve, right?
I'll move to.
I'll second that.
Thank you. All in favor? Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much, guys. And then we've got presentations. I'm really excited for this one. I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but Rob Terry. Rob Terry from the Office of the Property Rights Ombudsman is here with us today to give us a quick little rundown of some land use code and land use administration stuff. I love the Property Rights Ombudsman's office. I use them in my work fairly often just to be like, help, what does this word mean? So Rob, thank you very much for being with us. Feel free to come up and sit at the table.
I do have a presentation.
Maybe we can
You
get
can either plug it in, or I can even use my computer if you guys would prefer.
I have absolutely no idea how the IT works. We'll get Quinn, the administrator, in here. He knows how to plug in stuff. That's,
Maybe Dan can do
I try my very best not to touch that.
I'm usually the same way.
it. He just needs to.
Do you have an HDMI cable or is it easier to have a thumb drive as well?
It would be easier if you joined the Zoom meeting and then shared your screen.
Oh, sure, yeah.
There we go.
You probably know, but our wife likes to talk guests.
Okay.
Have to do the Zoom thing, that's a big part of doing.
So let's see.
I'm so glad.
You're the only one.
And you get comp time for this, right?
That's hazard pay.
Yeah, when it doesn't work.
You know, jokes like that are only funny if you've worked for a local agency. I don't know if anybody here likes Parks and Recreation. Like, I love that show, but there's been times where I'll find myself laughing and then I'll realize that it's an angry laugh and it's like, okay, I need to stop watching this one. It's a little too close to home right now.
My favorite scene is they're in the open house and a lady comes in and she says, I found a sandwich on the park bench at the city park, and I want you to tell me why that sandwich didn't have any mayo on it. That's every public meeting.
Yeah. I love the one when
We
the
need
lady,
answers.
the lady comes in and says that I was somewhere and there was a sign saying that the water was contaminated and I drank it and now I'm sick. And it's like,
I would like to bring up a point about that, Jen, too.
Yeah.
We have President County Commission update before we have land use. I don't know if Trish planned
This
on
was-
being here for
well,
the land use.
yeah, no problem.
I thought land use was under the presentations part. In any
It's
case,
down here on discussion items.
thanks.
But Trish has an announcement. Did you say you did?
it's
I
a
didn't
grand
have it.
gesture.
She doesn't have.
Okay, so guys, thank you for bringing that to my attention, Jerry. The way this stays orderly is, I'm sorry, I misread that. Trish, for the record, do you have any county commission updates?
I do not have any
No.
county commission updates. I mean, the one thing I can
so-
say, and Dan can kind of help me with this is, they did hire Jones and DeMille to basically try to take over, am I saying this correct? The Mill Creek Pathway project ish. How would you say that?
The Spanish Valley Drive.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
And in the upper.
No, I would not say that. They're just going to take
Scroll
over
down.
the property acquisition aspect of it. They already kind of are doing all the
Yeah.
design and permitting.
The title work. no.
Yeah,
Scroll down.
but-
from that
Well, they're not
one
actually gonna
meeting
do it. but
before,
they're
right
gonna
there,
facilitate it.
regular planning commission meeting, click on that.
So that it keeps moving.
Cool.
Although I got that prize today, so I'm still writing a resolution. You guys need to approve it. So
Okay.
throw that out.
Okay, but
Thanks, Trish. Thanks, Dan.
The
Um,
county did have a conditional use
Oh,
permit.
rats.
the ombudsman
Oh, yes,
done.
yes, yes, yes.
If you guys haven't seen that, that was really informative. To brush up on kind of how conditional use permits were, so.
Yeah,
mhm.
and we did pass a conditional use
Yeah.
on Tuesday. Sorry, I guess I didn't
So
do it.
send
I
an
just,
email
I
to
wasn't very
com
well
admin.
prepared today. That was the Ruby Horse Thief Ranch. It was
Yeah.
an environmental ed
Mhm.
site.
I had a question on that. I wanted to ask, when does the when does it become environmental and then when's it like a hotel? Cause I saw some crossover in that, and one of the
Well-
questions I had with that was, didn't we used to kind of pre-review conditional use?
That's what I thought too.
And that's,
but
I was
Amy
wondering,
Told me,
So-
no, I thought I asked that question during that conditional use
Yeah.
permit. But maybe you guys would
So
remember all that,
admin
but I
seal.
thought we did.
it seems like we would pass a recommendation or not.
Well, that was back when they were
Seal
public hearings.
admin,
Yeah,
Yeah,
Not public
they're not
hearings
public
anymore.
hearings.
yeah.
Okay.
So,
Countyutah.net.
Yeah,
and
I'll send you a
you know,
link.
the one thing that was brought up is in that
I'll go find a
CUP,
link and send it to you.
with their
Thank you.
website, you know, they do quite a few different
Right, I
things.
looked at that
A little
website,
bit of
yep.
everything, biking, hiking,
Yeah.
et cetera, and so on. One thing was also motorized, and they said they didn't do any of that within their application, but yet their website showed that. So there was one discrepancy, and specifically Attorney Stotts pointed that out, so
Right.
he said, no, we don't do that, we just do these other activities, so.
I mean, I like the idea, but I just was
Yeah.
wondering, on the county standpoint, when's it like,
Yeah,
you know, it was like, hey, we do woofer programs, and then we have some like, general people can stay, and I'm like, well, now is that an overnight
mhm.
accommodation thing, and I wondered how you guys were viewing that.
That, kind of goes back to what a conditional use permit does.
Yeah.
I feel like the guy who answers the question is in the room, and I'm gonna shut this conversation down as
Yeah.
soon as he's ready to give us a presentation.
He was just gonna send me the link so that I can log on to the Zoom meeting and then share my screen from there.
Super, thank you very much.
And they also have to do site plan prior
Yeah.
to them getting buildings. A lot of that will wash out.
Anecdotally, as someone who does a lot of recreation permit administration, there's a big difference between saying that something exists on your website and offering it as a service you provide.
Mhm.
You know, so they say, you know, you can go paddle boarding down here. You know, we'll drive you to the put in ramp, but you don't put a guide on the river with them. They're not a river outfitter, they're a livery. So there are nuances and state law, it's a much bigger picture. It's always more complicated. Yep.
I guess my question was is, I could just own a hotel and be like, we offer a little seminar for a half hour. Now it's an educational thing.
I
It's
think
not
you
a
would.
hotel,
I
right?
Well,
think
go
you
try
would-
it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think you would have that conversation during the CUP hearing.
yeah.
Well, it's not.
It
Well,
never
it didn't
does stop.
happen, so that's why I was wondering. That conversation didn't happen.
That was a good workshop. I think.
Alright.
that was-
Super. Well, the next thing after county commission update, thanks Trish, is public hearings. We have none on the agenda, so we're moving to general business.
Then Ravi should let you.
With land use 101 from the state. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Just ready to share my screen here. Good to go. Anything yet? Look like it.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. Looks like it's doing it.
Nice.
All right, there we go. Terrific. Well, thank you very much, guys. Appreciate the invitation to come down to Moab. You're never going to hear me turn down an opportunity to come to Moab.
Finally got good weather.
Yeah, it's yeah, I mean, it's an absolutely beautiful day. Thankfully you didn't ask me to come down last week when that crazy storm was running all through Utah. So my name is Rob Terry. I serve as a statewide land use training director. I'm housed out of the Office of the Property Rights Ombudsman. I will say before we get started, I'm the only non-attorney in the office, right? So while all of the attorneys there are fabulous, I actually take great pride in saying that I'm not an attorney. I have roughly 20 years of land use planning experience at the local, regional, and state level. So been able to see a lot of really interesting things, I guess we could say at that point. And while I am from Utah, I was raised in Utah, I married a California girl. So a lot of my planning experience came in the state of California. So I've got some excellent examples on what not to do, which can certainly always help, I think. I heard you guys talking about it when you're first getting started about the ombudsman and the fact that you have had the opportunity to work with them before. So sometimes agencies are not familiar with who the ombudsman is and what we do. So I always take them very quickly through this slide to just make sure that they understand who it is. It sounds like you guys are already familiar enough with the ombudsman that I won't take a whole lot of time on it, but I will say that we are neutral and we're an independent agency, and the entire reason why we were put in place is to ensure that local agencies have support as they're working through items, as they have questions, concerns. They know there's somebody they can turn to say, hey, what does state law say on this? Is there legal precedent on this? Is any of those type of items? And then also private property owners, when they're going through processes, if they have questions about what are my rights and what do certain terms mean? Oftentimes private property owners or people that are going through a development proposal, it's the first time they've ever gone through something like that in their life, right? So the ombudsman really serves to just make sure that everybody has the support and the help that they need. And in all honesty, I think the biggest thing is to really look at things the Utah way, right? Is a term that you hear a lot. And that's trying to get people to have good communication and work through items together without just simply saying what they'll do in a lot of other states with planning items, which is just everybody's going to lawyer up, we're going to sue each other. And then you end up going through an extremely costly and very time extensive type of process that could have been helped if you had someone like an ombudsman and attorneys there that can help people talk through items and hopefully get to that resolution place with a lot less money and in a lot less time. So that's the goal of what we do there. I myself focus on the information and the education portion of it. So that's what I have the opportunity to do. And then if you guys have not heard of this resource, I always like to point this out to people. So the Land Use Academy of Utah, commonly referred to as Luau, because as you guys know, planners have to put acronyms on absolutely everything, right? Yeah, it's a good one. Now, I was not with the Utah when the league actually worked on creating this event, but I heard that when they did their big rollout, it was like a full-on luau. I was like, man, that is incredible, right? So Yeah, the league's great, still very active partners, of course, in everything that we do. But the Land Use Academy of Utah website serves as the central repository for planning information. And what used to be a place that was really geared toward newly elected officials, newly placed planning commissioners, appointed officials, it's grown into a place of, it can help everybody from just walking in the door and one-on-one type of level things, all the way down to a technician that has, decades worth of experience. And we found that when people have questions and then they're provided with answers, why don't we take that Q&A, get it put online, because someone is going to have that same exact question. They're going to have that same need. So it is a website that every single day continues to grow and grow and grow. It's got everything that you can imagine. I mean, definitions, guidebooks, templates, examples, question and answer, videos, links to conferences from all over the state that are land use related, and just continues to grow and grow. So if you click on that link, because it is a refresh website in the last couple of years, I have heard stories that someone will say, I saw the old one. So all those bugs should be worked out. If you see a picture of Springdale right there and it's familiar Southern Utah territory, you're in the right place, right? Yeah, so just wanted to point you guys to that. Always look there first, but of course, our office is always there to help. And even if you're having issues with the website or anything on it, you can call me directly and I'd be happy to help you guys with it. All right, so into our Land Use 101, the Land Use Development and Management Act, commonly referred to as LUDMA, because why?
Acronyms.
It's an acronym, right? That's how it goes every time. The Land Use Development and Management Act is really what lays that foundation for all land use law and for local agencies to have the land use authority within the state of Utah. I won't go through each one of these bullet points here, but the top three I think are always really important. And I know for me as a planner, it was an item to always go back to the why of what are we doing. It's so easy in planning to absolutely get into the weeds, and you have to, of course. But the why of what you're doing, I think, is really, really critical. So first and foremost, any type of law and legal precedent that is being set is going to focus on these three items. So providing for the health, safety, and the welfare of your individual community, and of course, the state overall. And then to promote the prosperity, again, for your community, but also for the state overall. And then to improve the morals, peace, good order, comfort, convenience, and aesthetics of each municipality and each municipality's present and future inhabitants. One of the great things about planning is the fact that you get to take a look at what we have now, but you always get to be mindful about and where are we trying to go, right? What do we want to see? What type of things are we trying to avoid? What type of things are we trying to address? Even any challenges that we're trying to mitigate, right? And make sure that we're going to be able to have that healthy, safe, vibrant type of community. And great planning happens at the local level. So of course, while you have the guardrails that are put in place at the state level, it's right down at the local level, boots on the ground. That's where the rubber really hits the road, and the good planning either happens or sometimes doesn't happen, right? But it's all up to the local agencies. So has anybody ever worked a planning encounter before, ever had to deal with an angry citizen that comes in, right? I saw this meme a few months ago and I about fell out of my chair laughing. And then again, it turned into the wanted to cry at the same time. I would say 90% of the times that I had interactions with a member of the public coming in to looking to do something with either a property they already owned or something they were interested in purchasing or something they were interested in being involved in, right? And oftentimes, even though they may not be told, no, you can't do that, they're typically told there's criteria that has to be met or something of that nature, right? And it's amazing how quickly they can go to the angry, frustrated type of angle. And I completely understand, and always have in the way that it's nerve-wracking to be told you can't do something with your own property or you have to meet certain criteria. The most important thing, in my opinion, as a planner, was to always make sure that I was having good communication, very open transparency with people, and working really hard to make sure that I was showing appropriate empathy as I was working with them. And you know what? Sometimes that meant that the answer was still no. But if it was delivered with those things, it always seemed to be received in a much more positive light. Okay, so enough with the jokes. We'll get on to the fun stuff now. So basics again, and this is really 101 level type of stuff. So a lot of these things, I'm sure you guys are going to say, yeah, we already know this, we understand these things. But the reason why when we do these trainings, we start with the 101 is because they really all do build on top of each other, right? And then it makes it easy to kind of peel back the layers of the onion as you're getting into things that can be a little more complicated and get back to the foundational type of items that can really help refine that scope again. And oftentimes questions, concerns that seem really, really challenging can be simplified by going all the way back to the basics again and going back to those why and what are the foundational items that we need to be concerned with. So first and foremost, you have your general plan. The general plan is a state mandated document. So every municipality is required to have a general plan, and it's going to guide the growth and the development of your community. It's going to help you set your vision and the policies that you want to see for your community for their growth. It's typically going to be about a 10 to a 20-year horizon, although there is no set timeline that the state says it has to cover X amount of time. That is up to the community. Some communities have gone out a little bit further. Those that don't have as much growth or as much growth pressure, some of them have pulled back, and I've seen even 5 to 7 years because they have such rapid growth that they want to take a very, very consistent look at it and refresh the entire plan every 3 or 4 years. But most importantly, the general plan is intended to be what's referred to as a living document, which means don't look at it as something that you adopted, it's now set in stone, and that's it. If the needs, the desires of the community are changing, then doing things like general plan amendments can be very appropriate. You also don't want to, on the flip side of that, you don't want to be amending your general plan so much that the process itself really doesn't have very much meaning and doesn't kind of set that, due north compass for you. You want to be able to stick to that item, but it shouldn't be afraid to amend your general plan when it is needed, when it's the appropriate time to do so. Then we have our land use ordinances. The land use ordinances are going to be the written law that are duly adopted by the local legislative authority in the city or the town council or the county commission. And that is going to really then implement the specifics that are going to go into this is what we want to see within our community. This is when you get into your planning ordinances, your development ordinances, your subdivision ordinances, right? And then items, of course, like your zoning. So the best practice is whenever you're looking at any type of land use related ordinance, you want to go back to that. Okay, what's the direction from the general plan? And then are our ordinances in line with that? Are they pointing in the same type of direction? Keeping in mind that a general plan is called general for a reason. So you do need to get into more specifics when you're going into your land use ordinances, but are you headed in that same direction? If a general area is designated as future commercial growth or future residential growth, when you're then looking into your zoning and your other land use ordinances, are you zoning items appropriately in line with the general plan vision that was set? And then zoning, I always like to touch on zoning as a very specific one, because this is the one that we deal with the very, very most at the local level. So these are where you get into your local regulations that are actually going to manage the look, the feel, and really the operation of your community. They're going to control items like your land use, your density, your physical dimensions of development. Now, state law does have certain things that you can't mandate within zoning. Say, for instance, you can't say that someone can't paint their home a certain color, or that a developer cannot use stucco or cannot use river rock or something of that nature. So there are some things that you want to be aware of that for many years in Utah, we're not only permitted, but I think we're probably fairly prevalent in a lot of zoning codes. And you just want to be aware that those type of items are not permitted to be in codes in any longer. And that's been probably about 5 years at this point. The history of zoning is really, it was put in place to try to avoid the conflicts that you would see. So during the industrial age, what ended up happening was you would start getting these overlapping uses, right? And I think some of the ones that are probably the best examples are items like steel mills and things of that nature, and people living, either directly adjacent to, or sometimes even almost within these type of heavy industrial type of uses. And you can imagine the issues with safety and noise, pollution, right? All of those type of things. That's where zoning started to first come into play. Over the years, of course, zoning has become much more intense and has a lot more detail now included within it. But that is all up to your community and how your community is interested in doing things. I've seen very, very simple zoning zoning codes, and I've seen very, very, very complex ones as well, right? But it is up to your community how you want to do that. But similar to the best practice for your overall land use ordinances, because zoning is one of those items, you also want to make sure that you're implementing your general plan, but then any other land use ordinance that you have, you want to make sure that you're seeing consistency with your zoning there, right? So all of the items really should be communicating with each other and lining up to avoid any of those challenges of inconsistency. Okay, any questions? Concerns? Okay, jump in at any time if there's anything as we're going through. I know this is
One
pretty
quick
big.
question, you
Hmm?
talked about ordinances and you specifically said like development, subdivision, zoning, whatever. So in our county, we have a sort of a standalone document. That covers all those things, document. Then our Title 16 just sort of incorporates that all by reference.
Yeah, no problem.
Is that getting common in Utah, or is everyone still kind of following the Title 16, 13, 17?
I would say that it's probably more still following that, but you absolutely have the flexibility to take the angle that you have been taking. Yeah.
Okay.
Which some of the larger municipalities, I think, are certainly moving more toward that. And that's really just more about efficiency. Yeah, so. That answer the question? Okay, so then let's take a look at the role of a city or a town council or a county commission. So this is your legislative or your decision-making body. And they are going to be the ones that are going to actually then adopt those laws, right? That are going to be in place. The type of laws, and when I say law, I'm really just referring to anything that is done by ordinance and then becomes rule of law for that specific community. Those are going to be items like your general plan, any amendment to it, any of your land use ordinances, and that is anything that is being proposed as brand new or anything that is amending something that's existing. Zoning, same thing. Annexation decisions, if they're looking to grow the municipal boundary or even adjust the municipal boundary. Believe it or not, there is de-annexations that actually happen as well. And then, of course, the adoption of any type of fee schedule. So anytime the public is going to have any type of fee associated with anything, that requires a legislative action as well. So then what about your planning commission? So planning commissions are required in the state of Utah. So if you are a town, a city, a county, you have a legislative body, you're also required to have a planning commission, but planning commissions are going to act primarily in advisory roles. They are going to take a look at the majority of the same exact things that the town council or that the county commission is going to look at, to review and to approve, but they're typically just going to make recommendations on whether or not an application before them meets the rules that have already been put in place by that legislative body. There are, of course, instances where the planning commission will be taking final action on something, but they're only doing that if the legislative body has assigned them as the body that's going to do that, right? Otherwise, they're going to act in an advisory type of role. So that then brings us to a land use authority. So land use authority is a person, a board, commission, agency, or body that can include the local legislative body. So the county commission, the city or the town council, and that has been designated by the local legislative body to act upon a land use application. And if they haven't identified one, then by default, it goes right back to them, right? So if the planning commission, say for instance, typically conditional use permits are going to be something that is going to be assigned to the planning commission, right? And the only time that the county commission or city or town council might be involved with something like that is if someone comes and appeals a decision, right? So typically that's going to be that's because the planning commission has been given the land use authority to administer that item. So they would be making the final decisions there. And then to throw a curveball into it, we want to make sure that it's not confusing because there's now the administrative land use authority, right? And that came along with the new subdivision process. And we will talk about that in much more detail a little bit later in the conversation.
Continue real quick.
Yeah.
Because I saw some confusion here. Here in Grand County, it is uncommon in that the planning commission is not the land use authority and
Okay.
don't review conditional use permits.
All right.
Just so I saw a bunch of people like, we were
Yeah,
just talking about that.
It doesn't have to be that way. Yeah,
Not
like-
the way it works.
Yeah, you see that in a lot of communities, but it doesn't have to be that way because it is up to each individual community and what their legislative body then assigns out.
I just wanted to jump in and We were just talking about that.
Okay.
Didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's okay.
I wasn't correcting you either. I was.
My,
just-
my apologies.
We
if
are,
that
we
confused
are
you.
unique down here in a lot of ways.
That's okay. It's good to be unique, in my opinion. Okay, so let's talk about the difference between legislative and administrative decisions. In all my years of planning, I think that this most often is where there ends up being confusion, and definitely from the public looking into the agency. And oftentimes that lack of understanding there is what can create a lot of that patriot storm in the castle type of that type of thought process. But legislative decisions, they're generally going to involve making laws of general applicability for your community. And they're going to be based upon weighing broad and competitive policy considerations. So typically, you'll notice we already went through this list and some of the other ones: adoption, amendment of a general plan, enactment and amendment of your land use ordinances, your zone map, any type of zoning, change of zone, annexation decisions, things of that nature. Those are all going to be legislative decisions. And the legislative body is the one that is responsible for making those items. What are some of the considerations that they need to take into place when they're making those? So first and foremost, you always want to make sure that you're not violating state or federal law, right? And that can sound really, really complicated, but in all honesty, it's typically pretty straightforward. The federal government delegates to the states a lot of authority. The states then delegate a lot of that authority right down to the local level, because that's where good planning needs to happen. So it is not as common for communities to knowingly violate some type of law. And typically, if there is some type of violation there, it's something that can be remedied appropriately and typically with minimal amounts of pain or frustration, in all honesty, which I think is important, especially for planning commissions to know, because it can be nerve-wracking when you are looking at items and making decisions and making recommendations. That can be challenging. So keep that in mind. You have a lot of the law behind you. And the reason why is because of the second bullet here. If it is reasonably debatable, and the reason why I put that in quotations is because that is a law term that you're going to see a lot, but you'll notice that actually leaves considerable flexibility within it. If it's reasonably debatable that the decision could be seen as adding to the general welfare or the public interest, and it's consistent with the State Land Use Development Management Act, then courts are typically going to uphold a local decision as legal, right? And that's where items like good documentation and good transparency are going to be really, really important, because if a court is going to look at an item and say, this agency was clearly trying to apply their general plan, they're clearly trying to apply the zoning code appropriately, they had communication, there's good documentation that shows here why they made that decision, the vast majority of the time courts are going to side with the local agency. And the reason why is because you've been given that authority, federal down to state, state down to local, in order to manage your own community. Now, that said, the legislative body should always attempt to strike an appropriate balance between the public interest and then private property rights. Utah is a very strong private property rights state. And so that's something that you do always want to keep in mind is how important that is. So what's the role of the public? This is really, to me, where the number one item comes in between legislative and administrative that most often can be frustrating for people that don't understand the difference between legislative and administrative and what that means for their individual role or their input there. So when you're talking legislative bodies, the legislative body should always take into consideration any type of input coming from the public. And that could be a property owner, it could be a business owner, it could be an interested party, it could be somebody that just walked by and saw the agenda, that's interesting, and they walk in, I want to give my 3 minutes or however long I'm allotted for that, right? You should always be able to be open to their preferences, to their opinions, to listen to those type of items. However, it is up to the legislative body on how much weight they want to give to those preferences and to those opinions. But the preferences and the opinions of the community do matter when you're at the legislative level, because at that point you're talking about what type of laws you either want to have in place, or are you amending something that's already in place that's then going to be used administratively to review everything. That's what then takes us to administrative. So administrative decisions are typically going to involve applying the existing law. So anything the legislative body has acted on, you're now going to take those rules that are in place, and that's what you're going to use as the lens to then look at any type of application that's coming before you. It's what are the laws? What do the standards say? Those are the rules, that's the bounds of it, and that's the lens that we're gonna use. Typically, those are gonna be the items like subdivisions, which is the newer one in the last couple of years, or certain subdivisions, single family, two family, and townhome subdivisions. Items like conditional use permits, site plans, building permit variances. These can all change, of course, agency to agency, because it's all whatever the legislative body has assigned out to anyone who is then responsible for the administrative oversight of it. Sometimes that's going to be staff, sometimes it could be planning commission making recommendations, but anybody acting in the administrative way. So how about considerations when you're making those administrative decisions? Same as the very first one for legislative, you got to make sure that state or federal law is being acknowledged. And then I always put in here that it's really, really important, in my opinion, to do as much conversation as you can in plain language with applicants, right? Plan reads can get a little confusing. And so I like to always try to explain everything the best way that I can to applicants, you know, unless we're talking about a developer that speaks kind of that same type of language and they're very comfortable with it. Oftentimes private property owners are not as comfortable with a lot of language that's going to be in codes and things of that nature. So I try to make sure that it makes sense to them and for them. It's always important to, if an application meets the requirements, when you take a look at it, when you're acting administratively, you don't need to waste time on items. If it checks the boxes, approve it and move on, right? Let the people move on with their project and you move on to the next item that you need to review. Also keep in mind that when a regulation does not plainly restrict an item in a land use application, or it could be reasonably read to support different interpretations, the land use authority should interpret and apply the regulation to favor whatever proposal is coming in. What that means is you want enough specificity within your land use ordinances that if there are items that you want to be very specific about, we don't want these type of activities, you need to make sure there's enough specificity to allow for whoever's administering that to be very clear in reading it. Okay, that is an item that is not permitted. That is an item that is permitted. Because Utah is very private property rights oriented, when you are administering items, the courts are actually then going to favor more on the applicant, on the private property owner side, and use, free and open use of their property. You'll note there's a big difference there between the legislative, right? When they're making legislative decisions, there's going to be a lot more deference given to the legislative body. Once those laws are in place and you're now looking at the administration of it, it's going to swing back the other way, and there's going to be more weight given to the private property owner and in any applicant coming in to look to do something. And most importantly, the land use authority needs to always support their decisions with substantial evidence. And that is because if anything ends up being challenged, the appeal body that's going to take a look at that, whether that's going to be, you know, all the way to a judge if it goes legal, if it's going to be just an appeal authority, what they're going to look at is the record. What does the application say? What does the law say? What do the codes and regulations say? And then what evidence was there, right? They're going to look at things like, that's why meeting minutes are so extremely important to ensure that there was good communication. If you want to make sure that you have that evidence there so that it's clear why you took an action, and the data and the analysis that was behind why you elected to take that action. Okay. And then I think the absolute number one area that is most frustrating for members of the public is when they don't understand this item, when you're talking administration of an item. So a land use authority cannot rely on public opinion or preferences when you're making an administrative decision. And what that means is the rules are already set, right? So if someone comes in and they hand an application and you as an administrator are simply saying, take the rules, compare it to this, does it meet them? Yes or no. Someone's opinion or someone's preference on that cannot sway the decision that is being made there. This is especially important for any type of items at the planning commission level, because oftentimes someone is then going to come in and they're going to say, you're making a recommendation to your county commission for something, and they're going to say, I don't want homes there, or I don't like that color, or I don't like those designs. None of those items can actually sway the opinion of the planning commission. It's just, what do the rules say? And does this application meet the rules? And there is a major disconnect, in my opinion, there oftentimes with members of the public, and can cause a lot of frustration. So in my years working with planning commissions, I always made sure that there was good communication up front to ensure that those in attendance understood the difference between a legislative act and an administrative act, and the fact that The planning commission could not be taking certain actions based upon just something that they either liked or didn't like. And that there were rules, and it was the rules that we were gonna have to compare that to. Again, oftentimes that didn't, fix the fact somebody, oh, well, all of a sudden I now like this project and I didn't like it before. It rarely had any type of impact like that, but it typically did have an impact of there was an air of transparency and respect there. And they then at least understood why certain actions were being taken. And the ones that I would say I'm most proud of are the ones that, someone would come in and they were frustrated with something, there would be that good explanation there. And then you see them at the next council meeting, which to me indicated they actually understood what was happening, because they're saying, we understand the rules already apply to this one. But we started looking at the code and we have questions about X, Y, and Z, and we'd like to have discussions about that now, right? That's the proper process, because then you can adjust the legislative items, and then the rules, of course, are how they'll apply to the next applications that are coming in. But the land use authority can always receive input from the public for purposes of gathering facts and evidence. So opinions and preferences can't matter, but if someone comes in and they were to say, they were to give you something that has to do with your rules and say, I don't think that this meets this rule because of reasons A, B, and C, those can absolutely make a difference for whether or not a planning commission, what type of action they're going to take, or what type of recommendation they're going to make. Okay. So then that takes us to the administrative land use authority. So the administrative land use authority is fairly new. It came along with the new subdivision change that now requires administrative actions for subdivision actions for single family, two family, and townhome items. I believe this is probably where you guys had the most amount of questions right now. I think that was my understanding when staff had first reached out to us. So first, what is an administrative land use authority? So it's an individual, a board, a commission that is appointed or employed by a municipality, including municipal staff or a municipal planning commission, right? So it can be the whole planning commission, it could be an individual staff member, it could be a combination of those items. It is up to a local agency to say, this is the individual board group that we want to serve as our administrative land use authority. The only item that it cannot include is it cannot have anybody from the legislative body in any way, not a single person, or be that legislative body themselves, right? So your city or your town council or your county commission, they're not allowed to be involved in the administrative land use authority aspect anymore. The reason behind that was to try to say agencies need to set good rules and standards in place for single family, two family, and townhome developments, and then let it be an administrative item. If you can remove as much of the politics out of those type of items, the hope there is that you can provide housing units that are needed in communities faster. And if those units can be provided faster, you're able to get more units. And the hope is that supply and demand then ends up making the impact. So while you have the free market and government can't and should not control free market type of items, there are things that you can do with bureaucracy and red tape to try to hopefully make positive impacts on the type of outcomes that you can get there. So the goal there was to try to go administrative. So it's just a good set of rules. You hope to get more efficiency out of there, more transparency, and more product in the end. So some of the changes that were made. So Senate Bill 174 in 2023 was actually the name of the bill that made these changes that then ended up getting codified, signed by the governor and codified. And some of the changes that it made was, first, an applicant can request a pre-application meeting. And I always recommend for cities to take a look at the cities and counties to take a look at whether or not this is being done for them. The reason why I say that is because 9 times out of 10, you can knock off a lot of items in a pre-application meeting that then when an application does come back to you, it's looking really, really good. A lot more close to complete than what you likely would have seen without a pre-application meeting. They're not required. They do not have to be required. But if an application requests one, then an agency needs to schedule one with them within 15 days. And that doesn't mean the meeting has to happen within 15 days. It just means that you need to schedule it with that applicant within 15 days. And everything here, if it doesn't say, I'm pretty sure I have business days on everything, but if there's something that just says days, everything is business day. So always here, and not including state and federal holidays and all that fun stuff. The initial review of the preliminary plat needs to be completed within 15 days of receiving the complete application. That is if a municipality has a population of 5,000 or more. If they're under 5,000, then they get 30 days for that item. I believe Moab is over 5,000. Yeah, okay.
Just barely.
I thought it was. So, yeah, so you have your 15 business days for that, and then the review of the final plat needs to be completed within 20 days of receiving the complete application, again, if you're over that 5,000, so for you guys. And then there's only a maximum of 4 review cycles that are permitted, and I think when the law first got passed here, that there was a lot of question about what constitutes a review cycle, right? So a review cycle, first, cycle 1 only starts when someone has submitted a complete application. And so what does complete application mean? That means that whatever your application requires to be included, it has to have all of the boxes checked, everything included within that application checklist, and any applicable fees paid, right? So if they hand in an application and don't pay the fee, cycle 1 hasn't started yet because their application is not deemed complete. If they pay their fee, but the application itself is only half filled out, same type of thing. The review cycle has not started yet, and it does not start until their application is deemed complete. Now, that said, agencies should be mindful about ensuring that an applicant is going to get that complete application and get the clock started as soon as you can for everyone's benefit, of course.
Good.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another legal term that gets used a lot, right? Is that good faith, and is actually really, really important on the administrative land use authority side for this process here. There's good faith that is required both on the local agency side and certainly on the applicant side as well. But a review cycle only completes once you get your application in, it's a complete application, they've paid their fee. You do your review, your 15-day review for your initial, right? You then give them feedback on that item. The ball is now in their court. Until the applicant responds to everything the local agency gave them, they're still in that current review cycle. So they don't have a timeline. It's not 15 days that they have to turn it right back around to you, right? It's only the local agencies that have those timelines. But let's just say that they took 15 days and then they handed it back in. When they hand it back in and have acknowledged everything that the agency had given them within a review, line by line, then that is considered complete. And then you start the next cycle, right? So you can go through 4 of those items. Now, if you get through all 4 of them and there are still items that the applicant has not addressed appropriately, I think there was a lot of concern from local agencies too, of if we get through 4 review cycles and there's still items, like, is it just gonna be approved? Or, I mean, is that it? There's a maximum of 4. And that isn't it. If there's still items that the applicant has not addressed, then the agency just needs to be able to notate in writing what those items are, where the application is still deficient or it's not meeting the appropriate criteria. And then, of course, at that time, the application is deemed denied if it goes through all 4 and there's still items like that. What that would mean is the person would actually have to come in and go through the application process again.
And they have to do all 4 cycles again?
They could have up to the maximum before again. Yeah, you don't have to go through 4. If somebody comes in and you do an initial review of their application, couple minor tweaks, you hand it to them, they hand it right back, it's done. They've gone through, we're in review cycle number 2, and yet everything is good. That's fine. You can move on in there. You just can't exceed the 4. But they get up to 4.
So I have a question on this, Rob, from a staff point of view. And applicant would be frustrated. So if you do the first list, you go through the first cycle, and then in the second review, you find 5 more items.
Yeah.
That were there before, but you just overlooked them or
Yeah.
drill in, and now you identify that. Can you do that? I mean, can you? If it's not based on new information, like they didn't give you a new submittal, you just missed it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that's a very common question as well. And in all honesty, the answer is kind of nuanced, right? Should you? It's probably a different item there, depending on what red line item you may have missed. If it's something that's health and safety related, it's typically what we'll say, then it's appropriate at any time if something was missed and comes back on. If it's a preference type of item, those are things that the administrative land use authority should really take a look at that. That's where the good faith comes in, right? Is this an item that we just simply missed, but is not critical for the implementation of our codes and ordinances appropriately? So that's the recommendation that we give, but we certainly have seen areas of the state where people are coming back and saying, this didn't come up in review 1, we're now in review cycle 3, and it did come up there. And our recommendation is for the agency and the applicant to have discussions about how critical is that item. Is there a health and safety item aspect associated with it that would make that necessary? And if there isn't, is it an item that undermines the zoning code of the ordinances? Yeah, that makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I know, and it's situation specific is
Yeah.
the challenge that comes there, you know, but it's also important that agencies have the ability to look at items that are application specific, right? And
Yeah.
have some of that autonomy and that flexibility.
Yeah. Did we decide that the zoning administrator was gonna do this whole process?
We are the land use
We are.
authority, but I think they're gonna handle much of the, how's that word?
In my understanding in Grand County, this is the first time I'm sharing. Look at us. I'm pretty sure the county commission is the land use authority. We did decide several meetings ago that the planning and zoning director is the administrative land use authority. That is temporarily Dan Stenta.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get us too derailed. I will ask
That
you.
would have been Amy, correct?
That would have been it.
But on this particular one, the county commission can't be the land use authority.
They can't be the administrative.
The
land use authority,
administrative,
correct?
got it,
Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
Got it.
Yeah, so the land, and that's why I always point out there, don't confuse the two, because the land use authority is really the overall, right? Who has the authority to authorize land use decisions in the community? But then when they did the new subdivision thing, they said there's a new one that's an administrative land use authority. And title wise, well, that makes perfect sense because you want them simply administering items and you want them taking administrative type of actions. The fact that they're that close in name, I think, will still cause some confusion.
In my mind, I put legislative in front of land use authority when I think about drafting. ordinances.
So
Administrative.
here's a specific question for you.
Okay.
So subdivisions, residential subdivision, fairly straightforward,
Mhm.
often have public improvements, and so the last step, staff reviews the preliminary plan. Get the engineering stuff, engineer reviews it, everything's pretty much done. Take it to the commission, the legislative body. And for the final thing, because there's usually an agreement on subdivision improvements, which is a contract
Mhm.
essentially between the entities. So with this new subdivision process, it sounds like that legislative step has been completely removed.
Correct. Yep.
So,
Only for single family, 2 family in town.
right, but if
Yeah.
we still have we still have a subdivision improvements agreement or something like that, and it just gets. It basically would have to get executed by a staff member or something, is that?
Your legislative body can elect to say, because all of these actions are typically tied together, you're going to do that. Right now, with any type of development agreement, subdivision improvement agreement, anything of that nature, state law does say that if there is nothing within your code that someone couldn't do without that agreement, then any agreement coming in with that can be approved administratively. Right? So if literally all they're doing is signing on the dotted line, that there's an agreement and understanding of here's the standards, the regulations, the specs, everything needs to be in place. And those are all already in your rules. There isn't, say, a density transfer bonus, or
Right.
they're being permitted to, go above the density that's allowed because they're going to provide X amount of affordable housing or workforce housing. Something of that nature would still require legislative action. But if it's just simply formalizing their subdivision improvement agreement and you already have all of your codes, your ordinances and regulations in place, all of that can be approved administratively. It does not have to be legislative action for that.
But can it still be, because we updated our subdivision ordinances at the end of last year to try and come in compliance. And I don't think we addressed that step.
Okay.
Um,
It can, the challenge with that would be that the commission's authority would be limited in the way that they can touch the map. in any
Right,
way.
basically, they're just signing a contract,
Yeah.
approving a contract.
Yeah, so that would be that. We've had that question too, or similar questions. People said, well, what if someone is coming in with a mixed use development and it has single family and multifamily all together in one map? And the answer there is that you actually have to break out the single family portions of it, approve that administratively, and then the rest of it can go through the typical legislative.
What
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that was one of those, when I learned that, I thought, oh,
How about the addition to that, Dan? Where would the bond go at that point? Because it's part of the subdivision improvement agreement. Where would the bond go? Who holds
That's
on?
what I'm saying, if the commission's not, well, the clerk holds the bond,
The clerk can still hold the bond.
yeah, absolutely.
but typically it's based on a contract that was authorized by the commission, so.
Yep. Yeah, they can take action on those items, certainly. My recommendation would be though, to take a look at the language in your code and make sure that it allows you administratively to act on those items that aren't including any type of bonuses or transfers or anything, because development agreements, while they're great tools, they're really only necessary if there's give and take on both sides, right? So the city is getting something in exchange for giving something else, for expanding a use. If not, then any type of agreement, if it's in line with what the rules already are in place, that should also be able to be approved administratively as well. And by law, it can. It's up to the agency whether or not they want to.
One more nuance, because it's on my plate this week. So if someone comes in for a conventional subdivision use by right, they're not doing a rezone, they're not doing a PUD, they're not looking for some kind of trade-off, through a development agreement. But it's a large project that encompasses, probably go out 15 years, maybe for the build out. Do they get locked in on, so some of the components of the project, say, are multifamily units that require a site plan process? So in our code, if you come in with multifamily commercial, you have to go through kind of a more formal site plan approval process just for that. Are they vested under today's code for that component of the project that says that they put out there, okay, this phase is going to be condo units, this
Yep.
density.
Yep.
But the standards for parking and for landscaping and for lighting, all that, most likely will change over the next 15 years.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So do they have to have a development agreement if they want to try and lock that in?
They don't have to. State law says that when someone submits a complete application and it is deemed complete, that's that complete application, appropriate fees paid, that they are then locked in, that they have the right, that's the whole vesting rule, that they have the right to be, for their application to be considered under the rules that were in place that day that they vested. Most people, when they're doing a project like that, that's gonna be years and years in the making, they will do a development agreement just to simply have that absolutely in writing to really lock that item in. But by state law, it is locked in. The caveat to that would be that they have to go back to the good faith, right? If you should have language in your code that's going to state that if someone isn't making faithful effort to continue their project forward,
Yeah, we
then it cancels, right? So then their approval goes away.
Yeah, if they don't file a final plat every 2 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So if they're not going through that process and being timely with that, then they can, of course, lose their vesting rights. But if they are going through that, then the vesting rights would apply. But it's been my experience that the majority of developers request a development agreement simply so that they have that document. They'll typically then utilize that document through the bonding process, and other financing they need to have. That's really just going to give more surety there. That's also the reason why the state law said that you can administratively approve certain development agreements, because if that development agreement is not doing anything that's outside of the code right now, and it's really just more of a formality, then that's how you can address that one as well. So they don't have to have it, but I think it's a good idea for people to absolutely have one. And for an agency to do that. That one, and then vesting wise, the other nuance there I think is important for people to understand is if a project is vested and it's say a 5-10 year project, right? It's vested, and then the rules change along the way, and it actually is something that could benefit the applicant can request to have their application reviewed under the new rules. Right, the agency can't say, we're doing that, but they can request it, and the agency can then do that. State law does allow that.
The onus is on the applicant.
It
to
is.
Be aware of the updates.
Yes. Yeah, and if it's something that they feel is gonna be better for their project, then they can make that request. Now, if they make that request, there needs to be the understanding too, we can do that. But you are giving up vesting rights that were attached to the previous.
Yeah, you don't get the best of both.
Correct. Yeah, it's not mix and match.
Yeah.
It's the rules today, and
2019 code or the 2020.
that's it. That's exactly how it goes. Yep. And very important to note, I would say in any of the review cycles that the applicant needs to respond to any required changes that they disagree with in writing. So they can't just call and say something like, hey, I don't like this. I don't agree with that. It has to be in writing. Otherwise, it can't be considered. It's not part of the record. We talked about this one. A subsequent review cycle does not begin until all comments have been addressed by the applicant. Again, I always recommend for you to have language in there that says that they need to respond in writing to items so that everybody has that protection there. And then if the application is not approved following all 4 of those review cycles, then the agency is required to notify the applicant in writing where those deficiencies are, and then let them know what the appeal process is, if they disagree. If they fail to go through an appeal process, they would have to go start all over again with the application process. And then, of course, there's just the timelines there for most of the larger cities and counties. February 1st of last year was their date to have everything in place, and then for everybody else in the state, it was December 31 of last year. All right, this just walks us through the flow chart really quick. So for step 1, if the applicant wants, they request their pre-application meeting. If the municipality gets that request, then they schedule it within 15 days or get something on the calendar within 15 days. Second, they then submit a complete preliminary subdivision application. The Administrative Land Use Authority has 15 days for Moab here to act on that. The application review needs to be completed at the staff level, and you can't have more than 1 public hearing, which is an interesting item that they put in there because you're taking administrative actions, and a public hearing is a very specific term. It's not a public meeting, it's a public hearing,
I had a
right?
heartburn with that the first time they explained it.
Yeah. I still, I'll be
honest.
honest, because there is a difference between a public meeting and a public hearing, right? A public meeting is just open for anyone in the public to witness the meeting and what is happening, but they don't actually have an opportunity to give any comment. A public hearing is different. You actually go through the formal process of noticing that properly. There's then time where they have to be able to speak to that body. And if you're taking administrative actions on items and yet you're having a public hearing, to me, I think that can be confusing for the public to not understand, hey, I took the time and the energy to be here and I'm giving you my feedback. Why is it not accurate, right? So unfortunately frustrated, but that's the law the way it is. I know that there has been conversation about that at the legislature in the last couple of years. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some type of adjustment in that, although I have not seen any adjusted proposed language in this cycle yet. Then the applicant submits their complete final subdivision application. The Administrative Land Use Authority has 20 days here to go through that review and then respond with the applicant to either approve the application, or if you've gone through those 4 cycles and there's still something deficient, make sure that they know what it is in writing, and let them know what the appeal process is, if applicable. Okay, from here, we just get into several other, I would say, common hot topics and items. I want to be respectful of your guys' time. Do you have a cutoff?
You are the only guy
Okay.
we've got tonight, and it's only 5:30, so we're still historically pretty early.
Okay. I don't want to keep anybody from anything, and certainly if there are items that are not really applicable to you guys right now. So usually with annexation, while we get a lot of questions about annexation, I typically don't dive in really deep with agencies unless they're actually dealing with annexation processes right now and they have some questions. So you guys let me know.
I don't know, I'm not aware of any imminent annexations that we're dealing with.
Okay. I will say that there is the major land use bill right now that is going through the legislature has like 1,700 lines of changes to LUDMA. And a good portion of those are actually associated with annexation. So annexation, there used to be 2 tracks in Utah. There was one for Salt Lake County and then there was one for everybody else, right? Yeah, shocking. The history of it, of course, makes sense. And that was because in the 90s, they were having what was referred to as the annexation wars in Salt Lake Valley. And you had agencies that were literally just trying to land grab areas before a neighboring agency could get to it. So they had all of these rules that they had put there and then kind of cherry picked items out, said, you know what, I think that's good. Let's apply that everywhere else. And little by little, over the years, in my opinion, the term I use for it is just kind of Frankenstein into something that ended up being convoluted, not only for Salt Lake County, but certainly for the rest of the state. And a lot of the items just didn't make sense for rural agencies and certainly didn't make sense for gateway communities like Moab, right? And so there was the acknowledgement of that, and they've been working on some proposed adjustments there with some really experienced land use professionals for multiple years now, but really good process that have tons of stakeholder input from government, non-government, community groups, professional planners and everything. So if you guys have a chance, take a look there and you at least see what's being proposed for the changes on annexation. So if it does come up for you guys, but long story short on that one, I think the changes are actually going to help and they're going to make a process that's much more applicable for the entire state and provides consistency, which is going to be a good thing.
Here's just a quick question.
Yeah.
As the county, so we're the one that's getting the land taken away from us.
Yeah. Just say it like it is, right?
What's the authority, I mean, what authority or does the county have? I mean, you can't necessarily stop an annexation, can you?
You know, you can through legal challenges. I think most counties probably aren't going to. Typically, annexation activity is going to be desired by someone because the provision of municipal services, right?
Right.
So that's usually a county is going to say, we don't want to be in the municipal service game, right? But there are instances where there are absolutely municipal services that are provided by county agencies or even in partners with special districts and things of that nature. So that's, I wish I could say like, yes, they can and always should, or no, they can't, but really the answer is, unfortunately, it does depend, but there is avenues. The draft language right now adds more required communication and collaboration between an agency looking to annex and the county that they're seeking to annex from, which I think is an extremely important thing. You know, in California, one of the only things that they do, in my opinion, their annexations cannot happen without both agencies entering into an agreement with each other and saying, we are okay with this. And they actually have a whole subset of government referred to as local agency formation commissions, or LAFCOs, because again, why gotta be the acronym. Yeah, where they require an agreement to be between the county and an individual or multiple municipalities if they're, you know, if it's a multi-agency type of adjustment, but they require that. And so the language that is being proposed right now, in my opinion, puts more onus on communication with the county. But there still is anything in the draft language that I've seen that requires that to happen. But I personally think that's where it would be headed over the years. Because it impacts the county, right?
Oh, yeah.
So,
I mean, we've got a couple of railroad towns that were platted up along the corridor that were never incorporated.
yeah,
You know, they could still be there, they were designed as.
yeah, and sometimes counties are like, please incorporate, right? And then there's other instances where you're like, no, wait a second, we don't want that area annexed, right?
Right, but if the county says we don't want to annex, do they then have the onus to provide those municipal type services if they? I mean, this area, you know, it's got small lots, platted street that's not built.
Yeah, I mean, if they wanted to go through an annexation process or an incorporation process, because those are two different things, right?
Right.
And end up creating the same type of thing. So if it were a county area and they were looking to incorporate right now, then part of their plan would have to be, they're gonna show how they can provide those municipal type of services. And whether that's going to be the creation of a special district or, you know, even a private party that they're going to contract with that's going to do that, that would be on them. That wouldn't be on the county to show that. Annexation wise, it would be a similar type of item. If an agency is looking to annex an area, they're going to have to show how they provide services in that area. And that usually ends up being the biggest challenge why areas don't annex, is because either the municipality interested in annexing the area sees the bill on what that's gonna cost, right? And the O&M and everything associated with it. And oftentimes they'll then look at that and say that does not pencil out for us. Or incorporation, same type of thing, when there's the realization of we then become responsible for the provision of certain services, and all of a sudden it's not attractive, like, so. But yes. That answer everything? Okay. Annexation wise, a lot of the big changes I think you'll see will be what is referred to with the annexation policy plan. All municipalities are required to have that annexation policy plan. That, in my opinion, is where I would like to see more required communication with counties, because that's where it absolutely makes sense for them to be able to have that in their process. Some counties already do have that, or excuse me, some municipalities already have the requirement in their individual annexation policy plan that states what type of communication they will have with the county and what type of agreement may be required. But there's nothing in state law yet that says that anything like that is to the point where that's required. But pretty significant changes there. Okay, CUPs. Now, I believe that Jordan was Jordan down here? Now, did he meet with the county commission or was it with the planning commissioners?
You could attend if you want.
Okay, is anybody there? All right, Jordan. So he is the lead attorney in our office, and he's great. Has local land use planning experience himself, as well as being an attorney. So really, really good. I'm happy to go over details about CUPs if you guys are interested in those. You said that the planning commission here doesn't address them, so I don't want to take a whole bunch of time on something that doesn't apply to you guys if you're not interested.
You might be, I don't know, Aaron, you want to hear about the CUPs?
I was just gonna say, I mean, three of us are here and I just would suggest that people would watch that 3 o'clock, that was at a 3 o'clock workshop.
Okay.
And the way in which it does involve is of course, land use stuff and land use codes.
Yeah.
And what CUPs are gonna look like and how specific they're gonna be and how they can turn into kind of, relatively administrative stuff. You've got to be very careful with these CUPs.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
That's all important for us.
We can reference back to that, video.
Yeah.
Recording.
Okay.
That's fine.
I think the only thing I would say about CUPs as far as the interest in them seems to kind of ebb and flow, which is interesting, but I've noticed a trend in the last couple of years. It seems more agencies are limiting the amount of CUPs that they're wanting to have within their codes, and what they're trying to do there is just have as much of the black and white permitted, not permitted as they possibly can. And really only in certain instances where there might need to be something that is going to need to be addressed, and to allow individual flexibility to have a CUP for that. But many items within CUPs, because typically you're going to be looking at what a CUP is going to do is it's going to say, before you can be approved, in theory, this item can be approved, but there's certain criteria that you have to try to meet to mitigate impacts. And typically those things are going to be things like, service levels on your streets and utility system connections and connectivity for bike and ped and those are all things that can really be put into a code and say, you can't be less than a level of service B, right? Or something of that nature. As far as your traffic level, you have to have X amount of connections for bicycle type of stuff. They can be put into your code, and then what you're doing is you can eliminate any of that discussion needing to happen at a CUP level. So they don't need to come in and say, okay, we've taken your nebulous rules here that say that we have to address this, and we're going to try to plug it in here. You give them more specificity and you put the onus onto the applicant, right? And it allows for just more of that transparency, but the majority of CUPs that can be eliminated, in my experience, end up being more of a positive for the community, because there is more of the administrative oversight that you're able to have on things. There's more of the specificity attached with it, and there's less politics that ends up going into it, because the rules are going to be there and they're going to be in place. That said, there's certainly instances where a CUP is, a really important thing. Say, I've seen them for items like, a major hospital or something of that nature, where this is a very specific and unique use to this community. And there's going to be some type of impacts there that no other type of use is going to be able to bring in.
The big one in Moab is a giant, nuclear refinery, you know.
100%, yeah.
It's a good scene.
I'm glad I'm not having to be involved with those discussions. Is the federal government involved in any of those?
DOE all the way to the top.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah.
There's a reason why I'm bald. That's where that came from. That and teenage boys, between those two things, yeah. Okay, exactions, does everybody know what exactions are, how they work, what it means? Okay, so an exaction is anything in Utah, if it is a mandatory contribution that is required by a government agency in order for development to take place, that can be considered an exaction. That can mean dedication of their property. That can mean the building and then deeding over of any type of public utilities and any monetary payment, whether that's a development impact fee or anything else associated that is a required fee that has to be paid. All of those things in the state of Utah are seen by the law as being an exaction. So you can impose exactions, of course, but you have to be very mindful. And the test that you want to put in is what's referred to as the rough proportionality test. So while you can impose an exaction on a development, it can't go beyond their development and the impacts of mitigating just their individual development. And you have to be able to show that there's an essential link between the governmental interest or provision of services to the overall community, right? So those are that two-part rough proportionality test that you want to show. One example that I will typically use on the proportionality item when you're talking about the nature and the extent of an impact is if somebody were to come in and say, I'm looking to do a small subdivision, right? I have these eight lots that I want to create right here. My engineering stuff shows that a 1/2-inch water line is completely appropriate to provide services to all of these lots. You can't come back and say, well, you know what? We know that there's interest either down the road or this building here is likely going to cause more interest over here. So we want a 2-inch water line. You can't require a 2-inch water line for that service, but you can have conversations with the applicant about, would you be willing to place a 2-inch water line? And we will reimburse the difference in cost, that additional 1.5 inches, right? That's typically where development agreements and things of that nature can absolutely come into play, where there's going to be more of that understanding that laid out. But it's extremely important to understand that you can't require that of an applicant. You can only require an exaction that has that rough proportionality for the service provisions for their individual project.
A quick question on exactions.
Yeah.
It's this lot. We're getting a lot of infills. We're getting 2.5 acre lots that are splitting into 2 acre lots or something like that. And a lot of these roads that they're on never had dedicated right of way. So one of the requirements that we typically are going in and doing is saying you've got to give full half width right of way because their property corner still got to the middle of the road.
Yeah,
Is that considered proportional?
it is. Yeah, and that's because it's in your code, right? So the standards are already right there in your code. Yeah.
It's not explicit in our code that they have to donate that at time of thing. It says all internal roads have to be dedicated, blah, 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 but it's just frontage but most people aren't balking at it.
Yeah.
But the problem sometimes is it affects their overall density.
Sure, yeah, and there is instances, I mean, an agency has the ability to also say, because this law was legal at standards at that time, but maybe now is non-conforming, you have the flexibility to be able to say that you can allow something to go X amount over its density or whatnot because of something needs to be taken for that right of way. So agencies have the ability to do that.
Documentation.
Yeah, it's 100%. Okay, when you're looking at rough proportionality, I always like to break down the improvements that you're talking about into these two categories because it can make it really, really easy to understand. So first, you're going to have your system improvements. Your system improvements are going to be things that typically are public facilities that are going to provide services overall to the community. So the reason why I use the picture of the subdivision map here is because it actually shows really well for this particular development. All of the things on the interior, you can see those wouldn't need to exist without this proposal coming in. However, on both the top and bottom there in those green areas, those are areas where there was already public improvements that had gone up to that border, and they're then continuing on through. Those were system improvements that had initially been identified within a general plan and then went into a capital facilities plan, right? And they were looking at the expansion of these items here. Those are system improvements because they tie into the system and serve the system overall. Project improvements are those that are generally understood to only be improvements that are needed for the individual project that is coming in. And just their proposed development. They're really for the convenience of the future users of that proposed development. They don't add to the overall system, or not required, I should say, for the overall system to be able to continually function, even though they would certainly add to it. So the pro tip that I always put in here for this one is if an improvement is identified within your capital facilities plan, then it's best practice to say, we're going to assume that that is a capital facilities, a system improvement, and you're not going to look at that as a project improvement. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't some costs associated with that one that may be the responsibility of the individual developer. But you want to take into account all of the improvements that are listed in your capital facilities plan first, before there might be anything additional that the developer could potentially be responsible for. Okay, any questions on that one? I know oftentimes between system and project, that can be confusing.
Sorry for a little hypothetical question. Does a cul-de-sac going into like a planned unit development or something like that, would that be a system improvement or a capital improvement? I know a road would typically be a road would typically be considered a system improvement, but when you're looking at that type of what
Unless it was called out in your capital facilities plan and you specifically needed a cul-de-sac type of design right there,
some reason.
right? Then that's typically going to be project. Usually streets are, the majority of the streets within an application within a proposed project are going to be considered project improvements, except for where you may be looking at some of those areas that are on, major arterials or something of that nature. Items that are already existing.
What about, I'm thinking a little bit more about water, and maybe what about like MSW treatment or something like that, that exists only to service PUD or something like that.
So like we're talking like a private setup that they're looking at, or a specific agreement that they're going toward?
It's hypothetically, like in Grand County, everything's gonna end up being incorporated into some sort of SSD or something like that, eventually anyway.
Yeah.
But like, that's the plan for it.
Okay. That's the reason why I always will tell people, look at your capital facilities plan to see what's in there. If it's identified within the plan, then
We do.
yeah, for sure. Yeah. Every community is required to have one. So if you're getting certain state and even federal funding, that's a document that is required. So certainly
That's a new one.
But yes, take a look there. If it's not identified within there, then you can begin the assumption process that this is likely a project improvement. If it is identified in there, the recommendation that I give is to always lean toward, this is likely a system improvement.
If it's in the plan.
Yeah, if it's identified within the plan. And again, that doesn't mean that there might not be certain additional items that branch off of that or whatnot that are going to be the responsibility of the developer. But be as conservative as you can on that one, and try to give as much of that weight onto the system improvement side as possible, because challenges to any type of exaction can end up being really costly for local agency.
Sure.
Yeah, so. All right, so I know we got engineers or both. Okay, any concerns, questions, anything on that one there? You sure?
Well,
See, I knew it, engineers always. The engineers are the smart ones.
it's the aspect of the pioneering thing.
Yes,
So,
yep,
so what? You've got a big development that triples the use on a particular road.
yeah,
Right, so our capital facilities plan did not anticipate that being a priority project. Before this came in, now they're coming in.
yeah,
There's 3 miles of county road to get to this property.
Yeah.
That's substandard.
Yep. Usually what'll end up happening with those is that you start with what your capital facilities plan says, right? Even though, like you just said, that may be 10% of what it could have been or needs to be in this instance now. But that's the documentation that you have that's adopted and it's in place. So that's where you begin to look at that type of item. Then for the rest of the pioneering agreement discussion, that's where you then start talking to the developer about potential reimbursements and things of that nature, right? Because you can certainly look at something and understand this is going to create significant demand out there. We're gonna see a lot more growth than we saw out there. You can also even work with an applicant if they are interested or willing to do so. Even put their application on pause as you go through a capital facilities plan update to try to better identify those type of items. But yeah, the conversation ends up being oftentimes just like, okay, chicken or egg, like which one is it, right? And so that's where the communications with the applicant and the developer are going to be really, really important. I would say the majority of the time I've seen those dealt with through a reimbursement agreement.
Can you put that in as an exaction on the development, or is that gonna be over the challenge?
Yeah, you'd probably get challenged on that. Yeah, the documentation that you have at the time that application comes in. Is what's going to be looked at as the record for what you were able to then compare those items to. But you can have an agreement with the developer that states, even though it would only be, going back to the 1/2 inch water line, right? If it's only 1/2 inch water line, but we know there's gonna be, we actually need a 4-inch line here, and we're gonna need larger sewer, we're gonna need 2 additional lanes of roadway. You can have the discussions with that developer, and if they're willing to place those items, you can have discussions about reimbursing them those costs, or even offsetting development impact fees or something of that nature that is acceptable to them. Agencies absolutely have the ability to do that. Yeah, but pioneering is always a tough one. Does everybody know what pioneering agreement means when it uses that term?
I can kind of, yes, that would be great, yeah, it's outlined.
I graduated from Lehigh, so to me pioneering is always like, well, that's
a good thing.
by high school, right? Yeah, but no, the pioneering, and one of the biggest challenges that you see in land use, and in particular with development improvements, is the person that comes in first is often seen as, well, they need to bear the largest burden on putting stuff into the ground, right? But the law clearly states that any of those type of items are exactions, and you cannot require an exaction that goes beyond the impact of just their development. And so that's where the pioneering challenge then ends up coming in. The last thing that you want to do is say, we're going to put a 1/2 inch water line in the ground because that's all we can require this individual to do. And then 2 months after you pave over that, you now get to tear it up again to try to upgrade it, right? And so it's the communication with the developer is always why that's so important at that time. And reimbursement agreements, I have found would have been the most effective thing to do there, is to try to get all of that infrastructure that you know that you're going to need in place to the greatest degree possible, while you can then simply point back to that reimbursement agreement that shows that while the developer put those items in, they did it with the understanding of financially they're going to be made whole on those items, and the fees that they paid are not going to exceed what was required just to address their item. But you gotta have the dollars, right? So,
Question, the reimbursement is dependent on other people developing out there? Is that what the idea is? If somebody else needs that road out there because they're developing, is that roughly
No.
what reimbursement is?
I wouldn't say it's based on that. It's based upon the fact that they're placing larger infrastructure than would be required for their individual proposal, their individual development. So the reimbursement agreement that you're going into typically is just going to state the time in which the dollars will be paid back. Sometimes there's provisions that are going to say that it would be paid back at X amount if certain things happen. But I'm always going to recommend they need to be made whole. If they're not made whole and they could say, I was required to pay more, I was required to give more exaction than what was necessary to just facilitate my proposal, then they would have a legal argument to come in and challenge that the city was over exacting. So. that make sense?
Partially, yeah, if the other development doesn't occur, it would seem, and the road was big enough to serve them. Or the
Yes.
sewers were big enough to, they needed that particular thing. Then if no other development occurred, it's not clear to me what they would get reimbursed
From the
for,
taxpayer.
unless you made it a bigger
Right.
road than they needed.
Or a
Right,
bigger sewer or a bigger water line.
Yeah,
whatever. It's for some perceived future need,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and
Basically.
that's, it comes down to that perception of what you think you're going to need in the future. That's where your capital facilities plan, of course, is so important, because they're gonna take a look at what do you have right now? And then they're gonna take your documents like your general plan, they're gonna say, okay, if you grow in these areas that you're visioning, here's the type of services that would be required and the densities that would be needed here and all of that. So that's what you would try to base your reimbursement agreement on, but just like anything in life, just because you were planning on something and even working toward it and even had, you know, preparatory stuff in the ground ready for it, it may be stubbed, then it may never go out there, right? So,
What may never go out there? The water line?
The future development.
yeah,
yeah, development.
yeah, you may, it might not happen, you know, you never 100% know. And when it comes to planning, what you're doing is you're laying out what you think the future is
Yeah.
going to hold out there. But yeah, I mean, if I had $1 for every single time something that was in the general plan or even in the zoning code, ended up absolutely, not happening, I could probably retire, right? So, yeah, you do the best that you can, but the reimbursement agreement, what that does, or a process like that, whether the city does a reimbursement agreement or whether the city even says, we're going to utilize funding that we already have right now, and we're going to pay the difference for those improvements to be made. The key point there is that the developer can't be required to place more. What's that?
I'd get run out of town on a rail.
Yeah. Not worried. Okay. Variances. Does the planning commission hear variances here?
No, we have a hearing officer.
You do? Okay. I'll just touch on this one quickly because in all my years of planning, I think that variances are probably the most misunderstood term that's thrown around not only by the general public, but oftentimes even by, you know, planners or planning staff. And the reason why I say that is because variances should actually be fairly uncommon. And that's because you want standards and regulations in place that a variance is only going to apply in very specific type of instances.
Good code, you don't need a variance.
Exactly, yep. However, there certainly is times where they can apply and do need to be able to apply. But I can tell you that 9 times out of 10, when I've had somebody come into a planning counter and say to me, hey, I want to do X, Y, or Z, and they had been told, well, you can't do that, they'll say, oh, okay, well, I want a variance, which they just think a variance means just give me permission to do something that I'm not allowed to do, right? And what a variance is very, very specific. And there's certain criteria that you want to make sure is met there. And the reason why I use the picture of this one right here, so this is actually a development in the Eastern Sierras, and it was plotted years and years and years ago. Nobody has any of those in their community, right? It were plotted forever ago. And there was maybe 120 lots or so that were up in this mountainous area like this. And there was about 5 lots that were similar to this one right here. Never should have been created, in all honesty, but it was, I'm sure somebody literally just taken a map, drawing lines, recording it, and it's now done, right? Well, you get out to these several lots here, and they have these rock croppings on them where their buildable area is almost non-existent, right? So this particular one right here, the individual could not build anything without impeding, because where the only buildable area sat, they couldn't do it without being into their setback. And so you go through these checkpoints to see, is a variance appropriate in this instance, right? And so you literally will just go through these 5 steps. So first, literal enforcement of the ordinance would cause an unreasonable hardship for the applicant that is not necessary to carry out the general purposes of the land use ordinance, right? Second, are there special circumstances that are attached to the property that do not generally apply to other properties in the same zone? Right? So for this one,
Big rock.
was there rock croppings in everybody else's, right? Did everybody have this type of stuff? And no, there was just a handful of them. 3, granting the variance is essential to the enjoyment of a substantial property right possessed by other properties in the same zone. So everybody else that was in this area that had the same zoning designation they were able to utilize the zoning code to its full extent, right? These guys were hamstrung. Next, the variance will not substantially affect the general plan and will not be contrary to the public interest, right? So it wasn't going to require any type of general plan amendment, no change of zone. It's just simply going to allow them to utilize their property. And then 5, and this is the one that I think is extremely important and oftentimes is overlooked. The spirit of the land use ordinance is observed and substantial justice is done, which means every time you give out a variance, if you don't have some really specific criteria of why a variance applies there, it's taking away a property right that is enjoyed by other people. It's not something of their own doing. It's not just an economic hardship. Every time you hand out a variance, you could potentially be weakening the position of the overall zoning code for everybody else, because then they could just say, Joe over here got to do it, how come I can't, right? So if you can't point to these items, the reason why Joe was able to do that is because this criteria was met. And the essence of the code is still held in place, is still observed. And these last 2, these are just ones that I will always use as I'm going through the 5 there. The unreasonable hardship can't be self-imposed. So if somebody had said, boy, I love the look of those rocks, I'm gonna stack them up everywhere on my property, you now created that problem for yourself, right? Those rocks, you put them there. And it also cannot be economic only. So someone can't come in and say, I want to do this with my property. The code says I can't do it. And that's going to cost me money, or I'm not going to be able to make as much money. It can't be just based upon economics alone. And it has to be peculiar to that property. And then special circumstances have to relate to the hardship. And if applied, if you were told, no, you can't do that, then it would have to end up depriving them of a property right that other people in that same zone have. Right, so if we were to have told this gentleman here, you cannot place a home there, but everybody else, minus just the small little handful, you guys can't use any of your property here, but everybody else has the same zoning designation, they can. That would have deprived them of their use of their property, right?
As soon as I saw this picture, I thought of, well, this is like Castle Valley up on the rim.
Okay.
The one variance that we had, we refused the variance and person took it to one of these variance officers. And upheld the town. And the deal was, they were, but it did have to do with setbacks. I think the variance officer concluded, well, they didn't need to build a house that was that big.
Yeah, yep.
Could be a bit smaller. That might deprive the person of being able to build something like other people did on other lots. But it wasn't unbuildable, and now the person actually is building a 2-story piece up there that does fit the setbacks.
Yeah.
Et cetera, so there was a way in which they could do.
Yeah, they still could meet that,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, and that's an extremely important point, I think to note.
Basically, like I'm a 1-sentence kind of thinker, and that was a lot of big words. But essentially, the spirit of the law here is that it's not the property owner's fault that they didn't see the rock when they platted and zoned the lot. And so
In this instance, yeah.
in this instance, in this specific thing, it's not their fault and they can't be, harmed essentially because of an oversight that happened before they even owned the land.
But what is
But it needs
interesting, at
to meet
least,
that criteria.
and that's why I bring this Castle Valley thing up. I mean, they weren't able to build exactly like you could do on other lots.
But you could still
But
reasonably
you could still
use your
reasonably build a
property and meet
reasonable
the code,
house.
right?
Yeah.
And so oftentimes that can be really challenging, even tempting for someone to just say, okay, we'll give you a variance and let you do because, there's a cliff here or whatnot. But you actually have to look at it as, do you still have fair use of your property?
Yeah.
Right? And maybe that doesn't mean that you can build exactly what you want, but I hate to tell you that any property in town, depending on what you may be interested in building, might not work, right? So not everybody has the property right of you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want on your property. So unless it is taking away the use of their property and it could not be utilized within reason, and it does come back to that reasonably debatable item. Again, it's that same term is going to be used for the law here as well. Cool. Yeah. And then this, we call our Jeopardy board. It's
Mhm.
usually just, the, items, these are the things that we get the majority of questions on. In our office, and so I always just put this one up in the end if there's anything on there that anybody had any questions about that you wanted to cover. Or anything of that nature. I believe that some of the communication that I had heard about the training and the request had to do with the Administrative Land Use Authority. And any type of discussions about there being conflicts of interest between a lot of rural agencies, of course, utilize consulting firms, right, that serve as quasi staff, but are also private firms as well.
I was gonna ask you about that, actually. Amy, our planning director,
Yeah.
is no longer with us. She moved on, unfortunately. Dan's doing a great job filling in for Amy. But he's likewise, moving on to Logan here in, imminently. And, this is mainly for Trish. It's not our call, but while we've got you, I wanted to pick your brain about, what, assignment of role the Administrative Land Use Authority has been working best for counties like ours. We had it assigned to the planning director because, Amy and Dan and their staff really high operational knowledge of all the stuff you just said.
Yeah.
And we're a little bit nervous about the 4 review periods that we have and just being able to notice things and have meetings and keeping the ball rolling.
Yep.
I believe our other options are to make us the Administrative Land Use Authority.
Correct.
Or a consultant, which has been discussed. Or someone on staff. We currently do not, once Stan's gone, we just have Mikhail and she's like she's the administrative assistant. She has so much on her plate.
Yeah.
What do you think works best?
So I think the way that it was set up was probably the most effective, right? Which was the planning director was the one that was identified as that. But of course, with all of the moving pieces and even missing pieces that you have right now, to me, it would make the most amount of sense for that to go to the planning commission at this time. You certainly do still have the things they're gonna have to go to, sorry, what was her name?
Mikhail.
That a lot of the noticing, and I mean, there would still be a lot of the stress and the pressures, of course, that are gonna have to be addressed there. But it would make sense as far as the review body to be the planning commission. I will say, though, we've had questions from agencies where they're like, hey, we identified the engineer as being the person that was the Administrative Land Use Authority. And they are a consultant, and they also have instances where they're even submitting, they're an applicant or they're part of the application. Yeah, and I think in all honesty, that really just comes down to more of a statement of ethics. And that is, if they are acknowledging that they are involved in the process from the application side, there isn't anything in state law that would then say that they can't, review that item, but there needs to be that transparency where they're certainly acknowledging that they are included within that application, and that they're then also partially responsible for the review. And that really just comes down to staff limitations, resource limitations for agencies. So you can do that. If you have an instance where someone can say, I make the statement that even though I may be the Administrative Land Use Authority, because I'm involved with this application, I'm going to recuse myself. And then if by default, the Administrative Land Use Authority in those instances would then be the Planning Commission, that would end up being the thing I think that would be the most straightforward and would probably be the cleanest. Then someone from outside looking in could point to something and say, oh, this person's applying for and reviewing it. That I don't like that, right? That's not comfortable. I think that I think we see that at other levels of government right now, and it doesn't sit right? So yeah, that would be my recommendation in those instances. But all that said, there isn't anything in state law that says you can't have a consultant that may also be an applicant operating as that. But I've always encouraged people, make sure that there's the acknowledgement of that and that you have it documented.
So the specific instance that I raised, touch on it, I feel badly that Lucas isn't here, but So our elected county surveyor runs private practice in
Mhm.
town and probably does 75% of the plats that we get, subdivision plats come from him.
Okay.
So he's not really, I guess technically he's reviewing his own work, but obviously he's just submitting it. Right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, taking a second look at it, right? Yeah, so I mean, reading through your guys' code, when it said that the planning administrator, the planning and zoning administrator, I think they had worded it as. That's the individual responsible, and then it says that they may send items
Right.
to a list of people. So there could be the instance where you're saying, if we don't feel that it's appropriate for that person to be part of the applicant team and reviewing anything. Again, there could just be the acknowledgement, the reason why that person is not reviewing that is because of this, and you can utilize another party to do that. Or you can just have the acknowledgement there that that person is part of the applicant team, but they are also the only person available or contracted with the agency to do the review. And
I drilled a little bit more into the statutory requirements, and it doesn't look like the county surveyor necessarily has to be.
yeah, it said may.
Yeah, signing off on. I mean, even statutorily, it looked like it's not a required review of.
That's the same way that I felt, yeah. So that's gonna be up to the agency. If the agency has a comfort level with that, then that's fine, but there isn't anything state law that would preclude you from having them involved, or say they can't be involved, or they have to be involved. It's completely up to the local agency.
Just rural county woes. I'm sure Dan knows the number better. I think there's only like 3 licensed surveyors between Grand and San Diego County.
Yeah.
Like that, right?
Yep.
So,
I think there's only 2 practices.
yeah. And they're the county attorney in Grand and the county attorney in San Juan.
Yeah. Absolutely, yep. And I think there is acknowledgement for that, which my belief would be why you don't see anything in state law that says, no, you can't have that happen, because it's like you only have so much resource, right?
Yeah, I remember a clause about saying that the local surveyor could call up another surveyor in town to like delegate it out or something like.
Yeah, I'll typically say to people too, because your professional organization or what, you're gonna have your own code of ethics and right, things of that nature. So they can even reference those items, and if they feel, hey, professionally, my code of ethics says that these items need to be categorized or viewed as conflicts of interest, right? And then they could look at that from their professional standpoint. So even though the agency may not say that, and there's no law that says that they have to say that, they may say, we would like to do this.
ASCE or whoever it is that is in charge of it.
Yeah, the most important thing there is just that you'd want to have a flow chart or some documentation that would help whoever's administering it to understand when they're going through that process. Hey, if there's an acknowledgement here, then we punt over to here, or we just acknowledge it and continue to move forward, but just ensure you have that documentation.
No, I appreciate the insight there and really appreciate your time coming down. I don't want to I don't want to keep you here longer than you're ready for, but I also don't want to cut anybody off if they have questions while we've got a resource like yours
Yeah, happy to
down
be
here. Any other?
I don't want to bore you too long, but I'm happy to stay burn as much midnight oil as you guys
I
need.
have full faith that we can come up with something here in the last 15 minutes.
I have a question on your Jeopardy board.
Yeah.
Design standards, we have a separate design standards document,
Mhm.
construction standards, It's not totally, there's been some land use code changes that happened and the design standards haven't necessarily kept up.
Okay.
Does one trump the other?
Design standards and what? The land use code,
So the
I
design
would say
standards
they-
are adopted by the land use code.
That's what I was gonna
as a
say,
reference
the
document.
reference within it, I would imagine, right? Yeah, so so one isn't going to trump the other. Because they're going to basically be on equal standing.
But what if there's a conflict?
If there's a conflict between the two, and it ends up being so situationally specific is the
Okay.
challenge that happens there. But I would say
pick the one that's more favorable to the applicant.
Who, that's usually the most conservative approach, or the best approach to take is the more conservative one. Hopefully, there isn't a bunch of areas where there's conflict.
No.
Okay. Yeah, that's when I've run into those issues before, knowing how the courts swing on those two decisions, because when you're at that point, you're then on the administrative side, right? So you're looking at things administratively, and the courts are typically going to start the process in favor of use of the private property and more respect for the applicant, right, and finding for them. So the onus ends up being put onto the local agency to have to provide items. So, yeah, I would look at that more, and which one of these is more favorable to the applicant. That doesn't mean that there wouldn't be an instance though where you could look at that and say, well, even though this would be more favorable to the applicant, the city literally cannot afford that, right?
Health and safety.
Yeah, and that's what that could come down to. Health and safety to me is always kind of that ripcord. If there's a challenge, you can point to the health and safety impact for the community. Then you can usually go to the city side.
I guess I'll throw one question from the non-engineer side.
Okay.
Does the state have anything outlined how home occupation requirements in certain zones? Because I noticed we have it in our own thing, but does the state direct that at all?
They have a couple, but in all honesty, they focused more in on the type of home occupations that have something to do with like food preparation and
Okay.
things. So if it goes to childcare and food, any of the food industry related items, they have some pretty specific things in there that have to do with certain notifications and acknowledgements that you have to place and things of that nature, licenses that you have to have.
Okay.
But as far as home occupations of can you have a home office for this or for that, they're quiet on that.
So that's
And allow the
completely
local
dependent on
agency.
local agents. Okay,
Yep.
okay. I didn't know if there was any. Okay.
No, beyond those items, it's really handed over with, I will say, there's always a couple little nuances here and there that usually happen when an individual legislature has someone approach them about something that was happening in their community,
Right.
and a bill gets passed that is so specific, it kind of addresses that one thing, and that was
I
it.
got you. Okay, cool.
I know about a place where there's a specific misdemeanor C criminal trespass statute that exists only on a body of public lands up in Cache County.
Yeah, it happens. Yeah, and sometimes you'll come across those and you're like, where would that even happen? But then you have to just remind yourself, well, it clearly happened somewhere.
This kid got caught. And then, Rob, I really appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very
Absolutely.
much for coming down here. We have got a big year ahead of us. And you may get a call from us again in a couple
No
of
problem.
months. Who knows?
Yeah.
We will see how it goes.
Give us a
Yeah.
call if there's more training you guys are interested in, if there's any type of, legal assistance, you got some questions about any state law, anything, we've got great resources there. And we can get on the phone, get on Zoom, we can come be here in person, whatever's gonna help your agency. That's what we care about.
Hey, Rob, I have a question too. About the luau land use training.
Yeah.
Are those self-study courses or are there some on there?
So we just signed a contract this past year to have what's called a learning management system built, and then it will be placed on the Land Use Academy of Utah website. And so then there will be, and you'll actually be able to, do your 1-hour certification for
Right.
your public, Open and Public Meetings Act training.
And
So all of that kind of stuff, we then will have things that you can literally go in, it's all on your own time. You create a login, you can start the course, pause it, come back to it later, whatever you want to do, print out a certificate at the end. And then we'll just be building content more and more and more on top of that. But we just got the contract in place last year. And we just barely got the software to now actually start building out the courses. So I'm hoping that we'll see by summertime, some of these courses actively coming online. In the meantime, there's something called Civic Link, which is done with a partner with Jones and DeMille. And they have 56 different topics right now, and theirs is laid out in like a course management type of layout, and they're all free. You create You create an account there and then log in, everything is completely free. All of those items will also then be transferred over to the Luau website here soon.
That's called Civic Link.
Yeah, LINQ.
Okay.
They're making it as complicated as possible, so it's all one word.
We're gonna see you on the gram.
Yeah.
Talk.
Something like that, yeah. We're trying to get the lighting right so it doesn't shine off my bald head.
One weird trip. Add your saving accounts.
Exactly.
Well, folks, thank you very much.
Yeah,
again,
very
Rob.
welcome.
Really appreciate it. That was the only major discussion item that we had on the agenda today. The next thing coming up that I would like to just kind of run by you folks. I chatted a little bit with with Dan and, about, going to Mikkel and asking, about the process by which we build our regular meeting agendas. Trying to be very sensitive to the fact that Mikkel is wildly understaffed right now and just getting hit in the face with every planning and zoning thing in the county. And I also am, diehard bureaucrat and love a good form. And so Mikkel has suggested that we try to adopt this, agenda request form. It's a PDF document that looks to me by its form language that is probably maybe attempted to have been used previously and by other volunteer boards across the county. This form would need to be in 7 days prior to the regular planning commission meeting. So that's like, I'm pulling up my calendar right now. The next meeting is on the 10th. This would have to be in on the 3rd, right? This is simply a way, one, for us to have a compiled record in Mikkel's office of our attempts to get something on the agenda, so that eventually we can say like, hey, boss, I put in my leave application 4 months ago and you signed it. You don't remember when I told you I wasn't gonna be here? Same exact kind of concept with this. I don't think there's anything in the bylaws that say we need to do it at that level. I think we can just kind of agree as a body to do this with a straw poll vote. Unless, I mean, we right here, you can tell me I'm wrong, but.
No, I think it's a great idea. I've always utilized stuff like that.
Yeah,
Keep everybody on a timeline, right?
yeah, on a timeline, it does, like, does that make sense? And would we be willing to take a straw poll vote to adopt this as just a regular matter of our business? Cool. Do I have a motion to adopt Mikkel's agenda request form?
I'll make a
Then it's
motion.
not a straw poll.
No, it's not. You're right. Thank you,
That's
man.
an action item.
Yeah.
But in the bylaws, it does say that setting the agenda is the sole responsibility of the chair.
Right, and this is, would be one of those things where you guys can have a copy of this thing, you can email it to me. And then I will compile them and triage them this way to keep me accountable as I send them over to. Yeah, I should have explained that a little bit better.
Right.
This is just trying to keep. As much as we can, Mikkel's inbox fairly triaged
Mhm.
in the mass casualty incident of planning that we have down here.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so, everybody in favor, I guess? Thanks for catching that bit. Anybody opposed? Cool. We'll just keep. I will send this out in the PDF form. I recommend like saving it in your Google Drive. It's a fillable form, so you don't need to print it off. You can type it and save a copy and email it to me. You don't need a printer. I know, right? The other thing that I wanted to just kind of update you guys on. I guess this could be falling into future considerations because it's not any like thing we're gonna discuss, like vote on or anything like that. The land use code update. That's a big one. We're trying to ride the line of balance between keeping momentum. County Commission is asking that we try to keep and don't just let the land use code update die. Saying like, keep it going forward. I talked a little bit with Dan about what that looks like. He's working on draft RFP/RFQ. That's a nuanced little difference. But we're gonna carry that RFP/RFQ through to around the time when we're going to start looking at basically the team of people, a little subcommittee that ranks those things. way where to get all the bids come in. There's a little bit of formula. It's not like USA Jobs that way. And then we get a top 5. And then, Dan will be in charge of picking out, I think, 1 or 2 people from the planning commission, a couple of. No,
You're gonna be in.
no, me, okay. You're not gonna be here at that point?
Well, it's not my role.
Well, I don't know, there's, nobody working in staff right now, except for you and the
Yeah, this
trying to figure it out.
It's
Um, yeah, we're gonna, at the next meeting on, the 10th, we're gonna look at that RFP/RFQ. And review it a little bit and look to tap 2 people to volunteer to be on that. In my world, we would call that a ranking committee, but whatever. the correct term is.
You can make it as big or as little as you want. I find that if you have a committee, they work best if you limit it to 3 to 5.
Yeah,
They're more
you
effective.
don't want an even number, we don't want more like a smooth 8.
Gotta love that split vote.
But really, it's gonna be your land use code. You guys can actually consider it all in a public meeting if you want. I mean, this is for selecting the person that's gonna be doing it. The actual process of doing the drafting, rewriting will be a very public process.
Yes. This is just the, consultant A, consultant B, consultant C. They're gonna tell us they can provide us this. This guy has more maps, this guy has more words, this.
The rankers from planning commission talk to these people and
No, they submit us a packet, you read it, you evaluate it based on their submission.
all of planning commission, all of us.
No, I think, Dan, that you mentioned there might be a county commissioner, a couple planning commissioners,
Okay.
a couple appointed citizens, maybe. We have to talk about that.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, I can draft it however, so basically there'll be rating and ranking criteria. Like what you're really looking for, and hopefully at the next meeting, I'll have a draft, you guys can look at that, and see if that represents what your priorities are, like I was telling. Tony when I came in, I was planning on ranking pretty high, someone that has done a land use code update. At least a couple in Utah, so that they're familiar with the LUGMA, they're familiar with how that drills down. They're familiar, but yes, there's also. You could put in a ranking criteria on. So cost can't be the primary factor, right? But it can be a factor. But it can't be the majority factor, it can't be cost.
Such a weird thing to say in government procurement.
It is.
Well, it's because it's professional services,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
in theory, you're not supposed to just give it to the lowest bidder.
Yeah.
See what happens when you do that?
So, but I mean,
Reason
some
behind
other
that, too.
criteria could be, the staff that they assign to it, their timeline, we can ask them for what do you think your timeline for completing this work is, and that can be a criteria factor if you want it to turn around fast. They typically will send resumes or CVs of the key staff members that are gonna be involved. You can look at where they're from, what their past is, and stuff like that.
My advice on that one, when we do see Dan's draft RFP/RFQ, not to be too picky. If we have edits, just make them like one time, one little suggestion, get it back to him so that he can fly it again without having to present it to us twice. That'd just be really nice to tell him what we think. Good job, Dan. Hit send. It's good.
So, I mean, I'm plagiarizing from the best one I found.
Excellent.
That I like.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah. But
Super.
it's pretty good. I mean, I did look at several to sort of see.
I have faith in you. I just letting folks know. We've, in the time I've been here, never done anything this big. So we're just kind of like testing the waters, how the process work. That is everything I have got. I'm gonna suggest if we have stuff that we want on the agenda on the 10th, please, use the agenda request form. I will compile that all. I'll send it over to Mikhail. And
that point, it's almost exactly 6:30. Yeah, Eric?
Oh, I thought
What's
we
up?
were doing future consideration, sorry. I still, are we on that?
We don't have any items, of future considerations.
Oh.
Yeah,
Are we
That's
talking
what the
about-
form is for.
So we're not gonna do those things?
What future considerations?
We're not gonna have that little discussion time on.
Yeah, future
agendas?
considerations isn't exactly discussion time.
Okay,
The discussion we just finished up, that was the
right.
land use workshop.
I just want to mention a few things. The Moab Area Housing Task Force. I've been going to their meetings. They are trying to compile a bunch of new data.
And then I'm gonna process
Oh,
you one
okay.
second real quick. You gotta put that on the form,
Gotcha.
and then we'll talk about it next meeting.
All right.
Yep, there we go. It's 6:30. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move. Adjourn.
Second. All in favor? Thank you.
Or-
You can have, well, my notes are on
Are you gonna put it online?
I think it is online,
It is.
but I will email it to you. I think you actually already have it, man, but we didn't actually get a chance to vote on using it. Yeah,
Well, that needs to be on an agenda to vote on stuff. Yeah.
Suggest that,
okay,
we continue with the housing.
I will catch up with her
discussion
when
we
I
don't have.
I tried to.
Depending on, I mean. It would be nice to make. And to people that you're hiring. And I thought what we were going to do. Well, I don't know now, I'm gonna have people.
very much.
Get ready. Thank you. Housing. Affordable housing, so that might be something we could do.
Yeah.
It's about.
I don't know if we need a professional planner here at that.
Because they're coming up. with this,
Yeah.
I'm kind of like. The county also has a subcommittee that I went to as well.
Yes, yeah, that's
And so,
easy,
like,
so, yeah.
You know, there's. Brian and stuff's one.
Yeah, I got this name from someone who just wanted to property manager.
Well, I did take a look again at their housing report from 2023. And it of course is always good reading
Yeah,
to remind us of the things they would love the county
Not just yard work.
to do. So, yeah,
yeah, in the, you know, the county's ready to get way out of the way.
Yep.
I mean,
But there is another guy that we just
Yeah.
had.
we're doing a search committee for
Uh-huh.
that kind of stuff.
great.
So,
Move it.
and then, personally, I think we need to actually hire.
I'm gonna try to rent it.
To our HDHO, and then the
But we
things
need someone
coming
to
to HDHO,
be lined up
and be
to
like,
get, so.
which one, like,
Oh, I think that's-
yeah, on that subcommittee, Brian was so ready to just hop on the statesman, and we were like, hey, ours might be better. So like, what's the, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, I just, you know, like, looking at those things to be like, we want to adopt that again, do we want to use that again? So, those are things that are above us to have a consultant. for that. I think,
Yeah.
like, that thing is so, there's so many different stories, I think that's straight, you know? So,
Jerry, thank you. I was forgetting Jerry.
It's okay. I do it all the time.
Aaron, me, Aaron, Bob, Mary, Laura, Megan, Jerry, that's everybody. Yeah, I just sent you guys that form.
Oh, good. Excellent. Excellent.
Everybody's got it, but we gotta. I'm losing my mind.
Well, this is an amazing thing, how many planning directors we've gone through.
Where is,
It's not
Are
amazing.
you gonna be USU president? You taking?
Dan, do I
Betsy's
need to do
place?
anything with this? What's the, do I just close out of it?
Yeah.
Okay, I better get out.
And down in the right.